Chapter 21 Huam Village. Settled beneath Mount Hua, it was one of the largest villages in Shaanxi. In the past, when Mount Hua's name echoed loudly throughout the world, the village was full of energy, and their harmonious relationship with the sect played a vital role in that. The peddlers continued to line up to visit Mount Hua Village, and those who wanted to see Mount Hua arrived unceasingly. Thanks to that, Huam Village never had a shortage of customers to buy their wares, and it made name for itself by depending on Mount Hua. But time makes fools of all men. Mount Hua began to decline, and its name faded from memory. As such, the life in Huam Village began to bleed out. However, the Tehua Pavilion, the main base, still held firm. And now, on the top floor of this esteemed location, dozens of merchants were gathered. Huge smiles broke out. The sect leader seemed flustered. Did you see that face of his?
Very flustered. After all, we finally issued an ultimatum. Of course, it was too much. The coins they took alone was over 100,000 yang. Many sects would double over at such wealth. Their operations should have increased at least twofold. We extended our hands to help because of our ancestors' relationships, but they should have at least had some conscience and paid it back.
Right. A man should have a sense of propriety. The owner of Tehua, Chung Myung, nodded as he smiled.
Even though I am a merchant here, I must admit that it was unpleasant having to issue such commands to a place with deep connections to my ancestors.
What do you mean, Owner Kong? Owner Kong did as much as he could. In the first place, despite breaching the contract and missing the reimbursement date several times, you still offered them several extensions and opportunities to repay their debts.
Right. No one can blame you for that. We should be praising you for the mercy you showed. I am glad to hear such support.
Owner Kong leaned and drank from his glass, but inside, he was ridiculing those around him.
How comfortable.
Well, thankfully, he could live such a simple life.
Mount Hua is full of potential.
The true power of Mount Hua didn't come from its present force. The most important thing about Mount Hua was the history it had. When such a clan continued to exist for hundreds of years, there were people who would build relationships with it, whether they wanted to or not. At least in Shaanxi, it was difficult to find people who had no connection with Mount Hua. The current Mount Hua is but a speck compared to its former glory. Even if it disappears, few people will so much as give a damn. But the most important thing is what would happen next. Once people realize that Mount Hua disappeared, more and more will want to find out why. If the cause is unjust and they can't show adequate reasoning, then this Hua village could be destroyed instantly. Most of those connected with Mount Hua were people of high status.
But it will be fine.
Because his plan was a prolonged and effective one. Mount Hua has reached a simmering boil over time, like a duck whose flesh can be torn with mere chopsticks. But Owner Kong,
yes,
what do you plan on doing with Mount Hua? Owner Kong smiled.
Mount Hua is more meaningful than you might think. It may be old and fallen, but it's a good deal.
I don't get it.
Such idiots.
Owner Kong's expression was nearly distorted, but he succeeded in keeping an amicable appearance.
Don't underestimate the power that Mount Hua's name holds. Even if it is used as a tourist destination, many people will want to visit. But
Yu Zhong-san, who sold silk, had a crumpled-up expression as he spoke.
How much does it cost to rebuild Mount Hua? Wouldn't it be better to get something else? We don't need anything more. You don't have to worry much. I don't wish to disclose it now, but there is certainly a place which will offer enough compensation for that location, even if there's nothing left of it. You think so? For Mount Hua to be loved like it is the other way around. Ah.
Yu Zhong-san nodded as if he understood. A sect that would want to erase the presence of Mount Hua would buy it for a high price just to destroy it, and they could think of a couple of sects already.
So don't worry, we will get our money. As if I was worried. We always believed in you, Owner Kong.
Of course, we merchants always believed and followed you. Chung Myung nodded with a smile, but his heart held different thoughts.
I can't handle doing business with these people anymore.
This was a dying land. When Mount Hua rose to fame in the world, this place flourished, but there was nothing left anymore. Because of their deep connections to Mount Hua, they had stayed. Now they were slowly decaying husks, soon to be empty shells of their former selves. In the first place, Plum Village wasn't the main attraction here, so not many people came anymore. Nevertheless, the only reason they were able to stay and live was because of the money they earned when Mount Hua flourished. If Mount Hua vanished entirely, this village was as good as dead.
I'll need to organize and leave before it is too late.
If he can try and get a lot of money by selling Mount Hua, he could move and establish himself elsewhere. To do that... At that moment, Chung Myung turned his head. Who is it? As soon as he shouted, the guards who were there ran out.
Who's there?
Is someone there? Chung Myung didn't answer and waited for the guards to come back. Eventually, the guards returned. No one was there, sir. When Chung Myung didn't say anything, Yu Jong-san spoke with a smile.
Owner Kong, aren't we on the top floor of the Taehua Pavilion? Who could even come here?
Right, and if there was someone, they would have been found. Where would they even hide up here? Chung Myung nodded his head.
Was I being overcautious?
It could be. He wouldn't need to wait much more until his long-cherished wishes were going to come true.
I seem to be tired. I want to enjoy it a little more, but I think it would be right to end my enjoyment here.
Everyone agreed with those words and got up. However, once the nerves were raging, they would rarely subside easily. It seemed like he needed rest. Yu Jong-san staggered as he walked down the street.
I feel so good.
It looks like he had a bit too much alcohol for the night, and his excitement hadn't stopped. Why?
So much money is about to come my way.
The money they could get from Mount Hua is immense. The interest on the loan given to them had been compounding for so long that the initial amount is minuscule in comparison. If just that could be recovered, he would never have to work again and could rest and play around for the remainder of his life. Kong was an unreliable person, but he was serious when it came to matters of money. Regardless of what he planned behind the scenes, getting paid was what mattered for Yu Jong-san.
The moon is bright. What? There is no moon? Huh?
Yu Jong-san smiled and looked around. Instead of walking on a wide street, he had drunkenly stumbled into a dreary and lonesome alley. It was creepy. He wasn't thinking straight. If a robber came over now... You, wait there! Yu Jong-san closed and opened his eyes repeatedly. Someone was blocking the dark alley. From the black clothes to the mask, truly,
like a robber.
He was quite small for a robber, not too scary, but his intentions were clear. Still, do robbers usually commit robbery in those clothes? Wasn't it too obvious?
The clothes are screaming that he's a robber.
Yu Jong-san smiled and opened his mouth.
Am I being mugged?
I don't care about money. The robber steps forward. If you answer my questions, I will send you away nicely.
Ho ho!
Yu Jong-san laughed.
It isn't that I don't want to give you an answer, but I feel like it would be a bit difficult.
With those words, he raised his head.
You see, I have a lot of people with me because it isn't safe to go around alone anymore.
Swash! A group of men carrying swords appeared with a slight sound. They were guards secretly escorting the man.
I'd love to answer your questions, but I don't think doing so will make the Merchants Union happy.
The robber just looked at the man. Yu Jong-san, who had sobered up, closed his mouth and this time, one of his escorts spoke. What should I do? Kill him? Yu Jong-san stroked his beard.
If he came here wearing those clothes, doesn't that mean he came here with a purpose and not to rob me?
I believe so.
Then we need to hear the purpose. Capture him for me so I can have him speak.
Yes. With that, the escorts rushed forward. Wait a moment. The robber showed his palm to stop them.
Huh?
See, if possible, I would like to not cause a scene. So if you can just answer what I need to know, everything will end well. So,
how long are you going to listen to his shit? Bring him.
Yes. The escorts surrounded the robber in an instant.
Idiot.
Seeing that, Yu Jong-san turned his head away as he was uncomfortable with seeing violent scenes. They had a contract with a large sum of money involved, so the escorts he was handed were more capable than average. This time, the robber was unfortunate. Kwang. Right. Boom.
Oh my, that poor robber.
Quack. Yu Jong-san frowned. It seemed too violent for one man to be hit so much.
Didn't I tell you that he needs to speak?
Really?
Right, I'm sure. Huh? Who answered that?
Yu Jong-san looked back. His guard escorts were sprawled out before him, foaming from the mouth like crabs. The robber had clearly crushed them and was steadily approaching him now. Language is what separates men from mere animals. Yet when given a chance to speak, you chose to prove yourself a beast. The robber wiggled his finger. Come here. Come on now. Yu Jong-san silently approached the masked man as if possessed. Once again, if you answer well, nothing will happen. Understood?
Yes.
The answer came immediately. Now then.
Huh?
If you had answered like this in the first place, I would have just left. But since you tried fighting me, you need to be punished, right?
Huh?
Don't worry. I'll make sure you're able to speak. It was a dark day in Yu Jong-san's life. Chapter 22. Speak properly. You sound ridiculous.
I understand.
The robber, Chung Myung, crossed his legs as he thought. So,
Yes.
you say the money you lent to Mount Hua exceeded 100,000 yang?
Yes.
100,000?
Yes.
100,000? Yu Jong-san wanted to cry.
That's what I'm saying, you jerk.
If someone has a complaint, it should be resolved through conversation. But this man was bullying and abusing others like this. Hey,
Yes.
even with multiple businesses joined together, it doesn't look like you could even afford 1,000 yang. Yet you're saying you lent 100,000 yang to Mount Hua?
Ah, that.
Yu Jong-san, who finally understood what Chung Myung was confused about, answered with a large smile.
You see, that's how interest rates work. If you lend money with a high interest rate, the interest will continue to grow until the principal balance is repaid. It grows quickly, and before you even realize it, it turns into...
Hit.
Cut.
Yu Jong-san grabbed his head, which was hit. Stop being proud of it, you ass. Chung Myung took a deep breath. Well, there's no point in blaming him. Perhaps this debt has been accumulating for ages. Right. It's meaningless to come and borrow large sums of money now. The time Mount Hua needed money would have been when it was collapsing. They would have required money to stop people from leaving and upholding its name. By the way,
Yes.
did you say you were the silk merchant of Hwaum?
Yes.
When did you buy it?
Huh? What do you mean? Our family has owned that cloth shop for generations.
Owned?
Yes. As far as I know, it was my great-grandfather who made the store.
Chung Myung smiled bitterly. Is this possible? This cloth store was one of those initially owned by Mount Hua. Then, were all the original businesses in Hwaum successful?
Yes. It made sense.
In the beginning, this village called Hua was full of paddy fields until Mount Hua was established. As Mount Hua kept growing and visitors increased, the village changed, and Mount Hua would use its own money to develop the village and create businesses. Businesses that flourished in Hwaum were all under Mount Hua. What now? This cloth store was inherited from his great-grandfather? Considering his age, his great-grandfather would probably be around Chung Myung's age from when he was here in the past. Even Chung Myung had memories of going to this particular store to get uniforms for other disciples. Something smells fishy. I need some answers.
Please, ask anything.
Then who owns the Mount Hua tea shop?
That's only you.
And it has also belonged to their family for several generations now?
From what I know, yes.
Of course. The top 5 businesses in Hwaum are the same, right?
Yes, all of them too.
Chung Myung smiled at it. No need to ask more. He knew what was happening. Once Mount Hua went down, these people must have severed their connections.
Oh my.
No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't prevent a sour expression from creeping onto his face. There were 2 reasons why Mount Hua didn't run the businesses directly and handed it to agents they trusted instead. The first was that no matter how esteemed Mount Hua's reputation was, it was primarily a sect that led disciples down the path of martial arts. If it was known to be running silk, cloth, or tea shops, then there would surely be criticism over their priorities and methods. Secondly, Chung Myung, what Mount Hua wants isn't to monopolize the wealth, but for all of us to live well together. Aren't the people of Hwaum also people who belong to Mount Hua?
If we all live well together, we all will be happy. What more could anyone want?
This is how humans are, Sa-hyung.
There is only one reason why the forefathers and scriptures emphasize that people should learn to repay kindness. It was because humans are beings who don't inherently seek to repay kindness. No, actually, he was glad they didn't pay it back. Anyone would stab their benefactor in the back if the benefits were great enough. The sect helped these people to make a living, but instead of repaying it, they took advantage of the calamity the sect was going through and took over the businesses. And knowing what they did was wrong, they were living happily, putting all the burden on Mount Hua. Chung Myung kicked Yu Jong-san with all his might, making the man roll like a marble across the ground. Chung Myung looked at him and sighed. What am I to do with this one? There was a good chance that Yu Jong-san didn't even know what he was doing. He really seemed to think that the cloth business was his family's. How should I deal with this? Chung Myung felt troubled. At any other time, he would simply beat the man black and blue, kick the life out of him, and then go back as if nothing happened. But it wasn't that simple now. Mount Hua is a prestigious sect. Even now, though the name has faded, the image of Mount Hua in his time remains unchanged for Chung Myung. Maybe the evil sects could assault people without reason, but prestigious sects must behave appropriately and defend their dignity. The day he acts unrestrained will be the day Mount Hua fell. Even if it was twisted, it was disgustingly dirty. He could see what happened, but finding the solution was complex. He had to find a way to get the businesses back without intimidating them like a thug. Easy to say, tough to do. Chung Myung scratched his head and glanced at the man. Hey, so... It was then. Stop! Huh? Hearing the voice from behind, he turned his head. Huh? You're awake? One of Yu Jong-san's guard escorts, whom he had blown away, seemed to have come to his senses and aimed his swords at Chung Myung. He definitely walloped the man, but he had to be stronger than the others if he regained consciousness so quickly. You bastard, the guard sneered. Using a cowardly surprise attack. Surprise attack? Me? Chung Myung looked at the escort with a puzzled expression. Hey, you ran towards me first. You coward. Fine. Let's go with what you said. He didn't want to talk much with this man. Who are you? Huh? Given your skills, you definitely aren't normal. Reveal your identity. The absurdity of the situation grew. If he planned on revealing his identity, would he be wearing a mask? What will you do when you know my identity? I need to know who is going to die by my sword. What? I was the one that knocked you out just a moment ago. He should have pretended to be dead. Why would he bother getting up and speaking like an idiot? Now, he's earned himself another beating. Did all the kids get stupid after my reincarnation? If I was on alert, that wouldn't have happened. I've been a guard for quite a while, and I can't remain still after receiving such humiliation. Do you even know who I am? I am Jung Bin. Even if you don't know much, you must have heard of my name. I am Jung Bin. Even if you don't know much, you must have heard of my name. Sorry. I am not as knowledgeable as you think. Jung Bin opened his eyes wide. Although he was here to escort for the sake of money, his name was widespread in Shaanxi, but this mysterious figure hadn't heard of his name. You cheeky bastard. Jung Bin grabbed his sword and aimed it at Chung Myung. I'm giving you a chance to name yourself before you die. Chung Myung sighed deeply. Why were there so many idiots in the current world? Hey, you! But I don't think your current actions really fit the job description of an escort, do they? No matter how you look at it, even I seem more like a guard than you. I'm a good escort. Right. Sorry. A hot-headed, brainless person. Be prepared. Chung Myung clicked his tongue as Jung Bin unleashed his sword and rushed towards him. His physique was clearly higher than Chung Myung's. Their strength, speed, and internal energy was incomparable. By general standards, Jung Bin is so much stronger that even comparing them would be an insult to him. So was Chung Myung weaker? As if. Strength, speed, and internal energy. While you may judge ordinary people by these standards, it's not enough to apply to Chung Myung. After all, doesn't he have a lifetime's wealth of experience wielding the sword, And his memories as the Plum Blossom Sword Saint too. Ah, Chung Myung's sword moved slowly. Compared to Jungbin's fierce slash, it seemed powerless, as if he would struggle to even hit a stationary target. However, that very powerless sword moved towards Jungbin's sword. Huh? At that moment, Jungbin felt shocked. As soon as the slow sword of Chung Myung came close, a tremendous force suddenly was pushed through his arm. Quack! As his body could not handle the force, Jungbin soared into the sky. Learn thoroughly and come back. The brilliantly shining sword of Chung Myung. It wasn't vivid like the plum blossom, but hazy like flower buds. Thud. Jungbin's body collapsed on the ground like a rotten tree. Ch! Chung Myung clicked his tongue and went to pick up the sword. Using the opponent's strength against them, a kid who can't even handle this was no match for Chung Myung. Learn your play. It was then. That's it. Eh? When he turned, Yu Jong-san was staring at him, mouth agape and clearly stunned. Ah, shit. At that moment, Chung Myung realized the mistake he had made. Yu Jong-san had been living here his entire life. It wouldn't be surprising for him to recognize Chung Myung's swordsmanship. Yu Jong-san had been living here his entire life. It wouldn't be surprising for him to recognize Chung Myung's swordsmanship, which births flower petals. Of course, since he lived here, he may recognize that it's a technique native to Mount Hua, though the evidence is circumstantial. As expected, you are from a prestigious sect. I expected it, but... Chung Myung's face in the mask had distorted. Did he figure it out? Or maybe he would have made sure this man never opened his mouth. That clean and splendid swordsmanship, high-level martial arts, and above all, a gentle feeling of kindness. What? Kindness? Something was wrong. Chung Myung hesitated with how to deal with the situation. As he waited for the man to continue, Yu Jong-san confidently shouted to him. And at such a young age, there is only one place which could nurture such abilities. It is, oh no, the Jongnam Sect. Chung Myung looked at the man with blank eyes. Jongnam Sect? Why would it be them? Are you from the Jongnam Sect? Huh? He only had to think for a moment before quickly responding. Right. I knew it. Yu Jong-san bowed. Ask me anything. I'll answer anything. Thanks. Thank you oh so very much. Chapter 23. Why is he so late? Jogul looked around nervously. Dawn approached as the sun was rising in the distance, but there was still no sign of Chung Myung's return. If Chung Myung didn't make it before the morning, the elders would discover his disappearance, and then there would be a riot. The disciples of Mount Hua are forbidden from leaving without permission. What if they find out that Chung Myung snuck out while wearing a suspicious full-body black outfit? It'll be hell. He hoped that he would never have to see that. Calm down. But Sa-young. Yun-jung shook his head. He isn't that stupid. He'll be back before it's too late, as long as there was no accident. And no matter how much he thought, it didn't seem like anything could happen to that monster. At worst, he would be a little late. Still, doesn't he know that people are waiting here for him? Right. If it's him. As soon as Jogul voiced his concerns, the door swung open. Ch! Jogul and Yun-jung swiftly turned around. Saje! Chung Myung, carrying his cloth mask in one hand, began to take off his mysterious clothing as soon as he closed the door, quickly changing into Mount Hua's uniform. Nothing happened, right? That's what I was going to ask. Did anything happen? What would happen? I was treated well, and even treated others well too. Who? What was his name? You... Whatever. It was the fabric shop owner. Eh? Jogul and Yun-jung were shocked at his words. Seeing their reaction, Chung Myung remembered what had happened a while back. It wasn't funny, seriously. Yu Jong-san, who mistakenly believed Chung Myung came from the Jongnam Sect to clean up the remnants of Mount Hua, willingly released all the information he had. He was trying his best to leave a good impression and gain favor. It was good that everything worked out so easily, but at the same time, he felt bitter. Although it was no longer among the great sects, Mount Hua still had a formidable history, yet Yu Jong-san clearly held no regard for it. Even after witnessing Chung Myung's sword arts, Mount Hua's name never so much crossed his mind. Regardless of whether the Plum Blossom Sword technique was lost in recent years, it was still iconic as a symbol of Mount Hua. But he lived in Hwaum all his life and couldn't recognize it? Considering Mount Hua's recent history, no one could even remember it. However, the bitterness in his heart didn't go away. Well, something bitter will always remain bitter, and it helps me see things clearly. He was glad that he didn't expose his identity. What happened? At Jogul's question, Chung Myung clicked his tongue. It isn't something for kids to know. You're a kid too. Yeah, just go gather everyone. We need to train. Today too? Chung Myung rolled his eyes. Listen, Sa-hyung. Yes? Whether it's pouring rain, freezing snow, or violent winds, starting today, we won't miss a single day of training. Heavy snow or cold winds, we will not rest for a single day, even if Mount Hua collapses around us. Jogul nodded with a stiff face. He's decided. After all, it was his decision to follow and help Chung Myung, right? If he can get strong through training, then he would do it. Truthfully, training without rest was what he was hoping for. We'll gather everyone. Then you will... Oh, I won't be coming. Huh? Chung Myung looked at Yoonjung and continued. You know how to train, right? Yes? Then do it right. Then you... I have other work to do. Yoonjung sighed as Chung Myung waved his hand. Okay, today we will go and practice ourselves, but you're only exempt for today. Yoonjung had a slightly serious face. Don't forget that this training is possible because of you. If you don't plan to end it halfway, then you need to set the example and join in. I get it. The third-class disciples of the White Blossom dorms were training without complaint due to their fear of Chung Myung. Even though Yoonjung was the great Sa-hyung, there was a limit to what he could do if Chung Myung was absent. Sure. Chung Myung laid flat on the bed as the two left the room. Now what do I do? His head pounded and ached. He was dumbfounded. It wouldn't be difficult to merely wipe out the enemies, but anyone who learned about it would naturally link it to Mount Hua. If it was only Chung Myung's reputation at stake, then there would be no reason to hesitate. But he was a disciple of Mount Hua, and if he tried anything, people would say it was impossible for a kid like Chung Myung to act alone. The sect would receive all the blame, and it would carry the crime of forcing children to carry out unspeakable acts. Chung Myung wanted a better result than that. He needed justification. Reason. A reason. Chung Myung tore at his hair in frustration. Does any of this make sense? Damn it! All those businesses belonged to Mount Hua, but now they were trying to make Mount Hua pay them? His stomach was boiling in rage. He had to prove that the businesses belonged to Mount Hua, and the merchants tried to steal them away by manipulating the ledgers. In that case, what about the 100,000 yang? It could be paid back. No, Mount Hua wouldn't even have to pay because every nyang originally belonged to them anyway. They were the owners who made and used the money. Who would ask them to pay? So all he would have to do was prove that the businesses belonged to Mount Hua. Then everything will be resolved. If only it was that easy, I wouldn't be here. If Mount Hua still had its business ledgers, there would be no suffering now. If there was evidence, someone would have found it. The disciples of Mount Hua aren't fools. Rather, they're quite smart. Looking at the situation, when the demonic sect attacked, the ledgers and everything must have been destroyed. Is this also because of me? It hurts. His stomach hurt. Chung Myung rolled over in his bed. No, Sa-hyung would always keep the most important things in a safe place. Safely. Money and ledgers. A place. Huh? Chung Myung jumped up from his bed. Place. Place. Could it be? Would Sa-hyung ever keep his books in a place that could be easily targeted? Come on, try to remember. Chung Myung wasn't really interested in his Sa-hyung's matters. He knew that money was needed to run a clan, but he thought that a warrior shouldn't be attached to such things. But seeing these kids in Mount Hua struggling to survive, he felt bad thinking of how he'd behave in his past life. Since Chung Myung wasn't interested in such a matter, his Sa-hyung had never shown him any books. In fact, whenever he was organizing, he would often ask Chung Myung to leave before he began. Leave? Hazy memories began to resurface. At most, there were no more than 3 ledgers in Sa-hyung's room. There must have been dozens of ledgers for a sect the size of Mount Hua. So where were the others stored? There's somewhere else. There was no place to store it in Sahyung's room. Although he was the great elder and sect leader, his room was strangely empty. Chung Myung remembered that there was no shelf to even keep books.
Besides, he would keep the books in a box, and there were only 3 held in that room. So where were the other ledgers? Then is it true? The rumors was that there was a secret warehouse that only the sect leaders knew about. It was a famous rumor. Normally, Chung Myung would have investigated that rumor to know the truth, but he didn't check it because he had no interest in it. Wait, maybe. Mount Hua used to be a prestigious sect in Shaanxi, and sometimes strange things would arrive at the door. For example, forbidden martial arts which none should learn, or secrets that only the sect leaders know. Occasionally, legendary swords and treasures were obtained. So where did they all go? If those items were here, Chung Myung wouldn't have overlooked them, and they weren't sold. Some things in the sect could cause a storm if released. If the current sect leader sold them, then word would have spread widely. Then what? There must be a secret warehouse where books and treasures are stored. It can't be far from here. The warehouse wouldn't be placed in the open, so it had to be in Mount Hua, a warehouse which no one knew about. But could that be possible? How would you build a secret warehouse in a sect where martial artists swarm all over like ants? Chung Myung slammed the door and stormed out. There could only be one place. First, the entrance had to be near the sect leader's residence. If the entrance was outside, it couldn't go unnoticed. No one could enter without the permission of the sect leader, so it had to be there. The residence of the sect leader hasn't changed from the past at all. Then is that it? Chung Myung, who ran outside, opened his eyes wide. There was a gentle ridge behind the residence of the sect leader. If a warehouse had been built, it would have stood out in the eyes of the people. However, there is one way to avoid the eyes of others: an underground warehouse. If they had dug out an underground warehouse near the living quarters, martial artists with keen senses could have discovered it. However, what if they had made a passage starting here and built the warehouse under the mountain? No one would know of it other than a ghost. Chung Myung smiled. Right. When he thought about it, it was strange. Usually, in other sects, the sect leader would live in the most central area. Wouldn't it be strange if the emperor's palace was placed in a corner? However, the residence of the sect leader of Mount Hua was in such a place, and there is nothing after that. That's all there is. Seeing the small garden behind the sect leader's residence, Chung Myung grinned. It looks like this treasure hunt won't be too complicated. He felt as if he could see his Sahyung biting his lip and clenching his fist from the afterlife. Please understand, my dear Sahyung. Shouldn't our top priority be saving Mount Hua? If possible, I'll hand this treasure over to the current sect leader without touching it. Of course, that was only after he got what he needed. If it makes you sad or angry, then come back to life. Chung Myung smiled triumphantly.
Chapter 24. Chung Myung sat on the floor. I feel like I'm going to die. It wasn't an easy task. Although the garden was small, it was still on a mountain, and rummaging through such a place was far from easy. Moreover, it felt like he was stealing because he was taking advantage of the dark night to avoid the eyes of the Sasuks. Damn this body. He couldn't adapt to it. In the past, he wouldn't lose his breath even if he worked continuously for 3 days and 3 nights. However, this weak body constantly gasped for air. It was the same when he went down to interrogate the merchant. Going up and down was 10 times more difficult than dealing with the guard escort. Moreover, with his current body, this task wasn't easy. Chung Myung took a deep breath and pushed his internal energy into the ground with his hands on the floor. What was he doing in the middle of the night? Damn it! The warehouse was down there somewhere, but the problem was that he didn't know where. There was only one way. He had to check each place individually like this. Thanks to that, Chung Myung was constantly crawling along the garden, pumping out energy, searching for an empty space to find that warehouse. Something far easier said than done. Finding it was tough. This is like finding a needle in a haystack. Chung Myung sighed deeply. In the past, he could instantly check an entire small mountain with his one hand. However, His current limit required both hands to only shoot a small amount of energy. This is killing me. Moreover, it wasn't possible to constantly use that much energy. His danjun was too small to even be called one, and it would quickly be depleted. He would have to sit down and cultivate again every time that happened. What if the warehouse doesn't exist? Am I doing something stupid? His body was tired, so he couldn't keep his mind away from such thoughts. Chung Myung shook his head to blow away the clutter in his mind. Where there is will, there is a way. It must be here. Considering his Sahyung's nature, along with everything else, the ledgers must be safe and sound, and there was only one way to find it. It seemed like combing the desert to find a diamond. However, this was more like searching for a boulder on a beach. This hopeful thought was enough to keep pressing forward. How could he fail to find it? Once more. One more. I'm dying. Once more. Empty. Well, that's none of my business. Once more. No, hold on a moment. Empty? Chung Myung's eyes widened. To confirm it, he squeezed out even more energy. He felt something unusual. An empty space below him. It wasn't possible to determine if this space was the warehouse or created naturally like a burrow, as his internal energy was weak, but he was certain that it was empty. Then, Chung Myung spat on the floor and stood up, and then he grabbed the pickaxe which was next to him. I need to see it with my own eyes to be sure. Now it comes down to a battle of guts. Kwang, 1 dig. Kwang, 2 digs. Kwang, 3 digs. Down. Just digging down 5 times was enough to make his arms and legs tremble. His back hurt too. Anyone who learns martial arts would be accustomed to suffering. However, the pain caused by hard training and battle wounds differ from the pain of solid labor. Unfortunately, Chung Myung wasn't very accustomed to the pain of labor. Even if he was used to it, it wasn't something he could do with a child's body. Digging in a healthy land is difficult even for a healthy adult man. Besides, there are no tricks you can employ. This was something that could be done solely with strength and perseverance. Teh! Chung Myung spat out the dirt which entered his mouth. Come on now, whether it's your victory or mine, let's see. However, it would besmirch the name of the Plum Blossom Sword Saint. Chung Myung vigorously started sharpening the pickaxe again. If there was space down there, he would find it. Dig, dig, dig. Tak. Huh? Tak? Chung Myung quickly lowered himself to the ground. Then he began to peel the soil back with his hands. After digging up the soil, he felt something under his hands. Brick? Chung Myung's face contorted. It felt strange on his hand, and he could see a crack in the middle. It looked like a brick. It would be a good sight that a brick was below this place because that meant that something was created. However, Chung Myung had a different idea. If this place was Mount Hua's warehouse, it shouldn't be so poorly built from common bricks. A brick? Chung Myung suppressed his disappointment. He wouldn't be sure until he saw it. The most important thing was to see with his own eyes. Shah! When the soil was removed, it was revealed that the bricks made a clear pattern. It was night, so he couldn't see it well, but he could tell that something was underneath it. Let's see. Chung Myung carefully grabbed one of the bricks. As many years had passed, the bricks were firmly attached to one another. He pulled the brick with force, yet he was careful not to break it. And the brick was slowly pulled free from the others. Great! Chung Myung carefully pulled out the brick and shoved his face into the hole he had created. Okay, here is... Chung Myung raised his head and frowned. There was nothing down below. All he could see was... No way. A hallway? Tightly, he clenched his fists. He wasn't wrong. He searched properly and found something. The place he found wasn't the warehouse, but the path that led to it. Due to his lack of internal energy, he couldn't distinguish between a warehouse or a hallway. But finding this place meant that he found the path to the warehouse. Great! The moment Chung Myung raised his head and tried to remove more bricks, he heard a low sound of footsteps from below. Chung Myung almost screamed in shock as someone was walking through the hallway. Jangmun? He tilted his head back and hurriedly covered the bricks he pulled out. But there was a bigger problem. Shit! Some light was leaking through the cracks created from removing the bricks. Chung Myung, in a panic, quickly covered the bricks and then laid his body over them as he stifled his breathing. Why now of all times? He could get caught. What would he say to the sect leader if he asked how this child found this place? He couldn't let himself be caught. Step, step. The sound of footsteps walking through the dark hallway gradually grew closer. It has to be Chung Myung. His appearance came into view in the dark corridor as he continued his casual pace. Fortunately, the sect leader passed by where Chung Myung was hidden, but there was no sigh of relief. The sect leader came to a stop a short distance away. A wall? As his eyes got used to the darkness, he could see what was happening through the hole. A large wall could be seen where the sect leader had stopped. No, not a wall. It might seem that way, but it wasn't a wall. At the end of the long hallway was a door. The sect leader stood still as he looked at it. He knew about this after all. Chung Myung had expected him to know. Apart from the sect leader, there was no way anyone else could know about this place. Likely, this was a secret location passed down through the generations from one sect leader to the next. Or maybe he simply discovered it while living in his residence over time. Rather, how strange would it be if the sect leader didn't know that this warehouse existed? This must have been where the books and treasures were kept, right? It was then. The sect leader quietly raised his hand and touched the door. He traced the door with his fingertips as if he was feeling something precious. What is he up to? An action with no meaning. However, a somber air around the sect leader made it feel as if this meaningless action carried some purpose. As he fumbled with the door, he slowly lowered his head and remained in that position for a time. Only then did Chung Myung realize it wasn't that he was doing something, it was that he couldn't do anything. Chung Myung, who looked at it, bit back his words. Small, weak. The back of the great Mount Hua leader should always be wide and warm. But now, this man's back was bent like that of a village chief, overburdened by his obligations. A small back that went unseen by anyone else. Only within this corridor can he show his weakness. Outside, he refuses to allow anyone else to see his meek self. Chung Myung could feel the old man's trembling. Ah, now he understood. He can't open it. Chung Myung bit his lip. His back hurts. It's cold and painful. Mount Hua was collapsing. Their name was tarnished, and their riches had been lost. Those who used to stand below them were now driving them into a corner and demanding what little they had left. Every day they grew hungrier, and their blades grew sharper. How desperate would he have been all this time? How miserable would it have been for this sect leader who couldn't do anything but watch Mount Hua collapse in his lifetime? Still, he couldn't speak of it to anyone because he is the sect leader, which the people depended upon. He wasn't someone who could lay his burdens on them. Even if everything collapsed, he had to be firm and support the others like a massive tree that dug its roots firmly into the earth. So, he was in this place, seeking solace alone amidst the pain and sorrow, grasping at the door which held his hopes yet refused to open. Chung Myung looked at the sect leader's back as if trying to engrave that image into his eyes. The sect leader, who hadn't moved for a while, raised his head. He stared at the door intensely, took a deep breath, and then turned around, slowly making his way back out of the hallway. Chung Myung held his breath until the sect leader's presence completely disappeared, and then lifted the brick and slowly jumped in. He bore witness to something he didn't want to see. The fault lies with me. Not just him. Even the others during his time were at fault. The world's future was important, but the sect's future, this Mount Hua Sect, was important too. It was important to go after the monster that arose, but they should have thought about the children they were leaving behind. It isn't too late now. If there was a mistake, he could rectify it. From now, Chung Myung will help to return their lost years. Well then, he turned his head. Shall we open this damned door first? Chapter 25. Before that, let's check the surrounding first. Chung Myung shook his head and turned away. He had to make sure that he was ready to avoid any traps that might activate when he opened the door. Knowing his Sahyong, he was sure that the old man would have traps if anyone other than himself tried to enter. That man was one careful bastard. I don't see anything strange. Chung Myung's gaze was drawn to a hole at the top of the corridor. It seemed to confirm that some device that should have been there was missing.
It was a hole big enough to fit a child's fist, and it wasn't just one. There were dozens of these holes, separated a fixed distance apart from each other at regular intervals. Originally, there must have been lights placed there. This hallway should have been a brightly shining one, not a dark hallway like now. Each time the sect ran low on money, they must have taken and sold another lantern to cover their growing debts. The corridor steadily dimmed and lost its light with each challenge they faced. What was the sect leader thinking as he looked at the dark hallway each time he entered? Was Mount Hua's hope fading with every light sold? Did he feel that as this corridor's light gradually faded, another path for Mount Hua's revival would be severed? Chung Myung scratched his head. It would have been better not to see this. Heavy. So heavy. He knew it because he wasn't stupid. Although the sect leader and the Sasuks never let the weight of their burdens show, Chung Myung could still guess how they felt. Everyone likely had trouble even sleeping properly. The weight of Mount Hua's declining name, gradually rotting away during their generation, weighed heavily on their minds. And they must have been under this kind of pressure all their lives. It's unfair. It wouldn't be enough to do something alone. In fact, it was true that Chung Myung alone had raised the name and reputation of Mount Hua back when he was known as the Plum Blossom Sword Saint. But even then, the glory of Mount Hua had echoed in the ears of the people long before Chung Myung's time. Chung Myung clicked his tongue and moved to the door. He was done sitting around complaining. Now it was time to try and open the door. But how do I open this? Chung Myung tilted his head. There was no handle for the door. The long dividing line in the middle was what made him guess that it was a door. Without that line, it would simply be a wall. And what are these lines? A long split in the center was a sign of the door interlocking. Then what about those jumbled horizontal and vertical lines? It looked as if someone had used the wall to practice their swordsmanship. Is this really a door? Chung Myung, who placed his hand on the unknown wall or door, quietly infused his energy into it, but he soon let go of it and backed off. Insane! The energy wouldn't enter. With an ordinary wall, such a thing couldn't happen, which meant that there was something behind this door. 1,000-year-old cold iron. At least an inch thick, too. All the money must have gone to this. It must have been incredibly expensive to bring in that precious piece of iron and use it as a warehouse door. That's why the sect leader couldn't even think of opening it. This was the best metal in the world. A sword, forged from this ore, would be a treasured blade, while an armor made of this material would turn into a priceless garment with impenetrable defense. It's a rare treasure that holds far more value than gold at the same weight. So how was a warehouse made of such a material? Depending on what you think, it may seem foolish. However, just from this act alone, you can gaze into the sect leader's personality. To use such an expensive metal like this. But Chung Myung could understand why the sect leader couldn't open this place. 1,000-year-old cold iron was the most rigid metal in the world. Even Chung Myung wouldn't be able to cut it. If such metal was an inch thick, it would take Chung Myung at his peak in the past, utilizing all his techniques to cut through it all. So if he wanted to cut this now, he would have to be the best swordsman in the world or bring someone equally strong. But would such an expert just kindly open the door to the treasury and walk away without touching the contents inside? Absolutely not. A toothless Mount Hua would be easy to exploit, and those with power will take away what they want without any consideration for Mount Hua. Mount Hua could face absolute destruction if robbers and outsiders were clumsily asked for help. The Jangwon's choice wasn't wrong. Calling in a master to avoid the immediate downfall would be like calling in a tiger to avoid the wolf. What is inside the warehouse is essential, but even the material it is made of could attract calamity. Items that could bring in thousands of gold would incite thievery if the information was made public. The problem is, even I can't cut it. Chung Myung's face distorted slightly. If it was him from the past, he could even cut it open with his bare hands as he reached the peak of the sword in the past. Never mind. He put aside all thoughts of his past life. Chung Myung looked at the patterns on the wall. This was a door, and as his Sahyung could enter and come out, there had to be a way to open it. His Sahyung wasn't stronger than Chung Myung, so his method would be, This is 24 Plum Blossom Sword technique? The pattern on the wall? No, it was from a sword. Some of the patterns resembled the 24 Plum Blossom Sword technique. And once a clue was found, the other patterns could be recognized as well. This is the equilibrium sword technique. And this one is also the Plum Blossom Sword. There were lines from shallow cuts to deep marks. Engraved on this door were the techniques unique to the disciples of Mount Hua.
That's why the sect leader couldn't open it.
Because the Plum Blossom Sword calls for the 24 Plum Blossom Sword technique, which has been lost to the sect. Although it's possible to recognize a sword technique from the pattern it leaves, the sect leader couldn't learn and understand the technique just from these markings. This death. Chung Myung let out a sigh. The marks started with the equilibrium sword and bamboo leaf technique, followed by the 24 Plum Blossom Sword technique. That was the way to open this door. If the technique was spread precisely along the path, it would make the door open by itself. Chung Myung couldn't understand how such a thing was created, but the problem was solved. Now only one problem remained. How am I supposed to do this? If it was the past, there wouldn't be any problem. Not just him, but any disciple of Mount Hua in the past would be able to open this door without much trouble. However, the current Chung Myung was a child who didn't properly learn the sword technique. He could still follow the sword lines. However, it was impossible for him to put in the energy needed to unfold it at once. Chung Myung sighed deeply. Nothing is impossible. If it was impossible, then make it possible. There were no problems in the world that couldn't be solved. Chung Myung gritted his teeth and put his hand together on his danjeon. I really don't want to do this. He didn't want to resort to this. He didn't want to overdo it, but this was the only method left that he could think of. I think I'll end up needing to recuperate for about a month. Chung Myung thought and then used his strength to tap into his innate ki, located in the deepest part of his danjeon, the true internal ki, the power that every human has since birth. It was different from the inner ki trained through cultivation. Even if your ki is used up or vanishes, the person wouldn't die. Although they would feel a great sense of helplessness and weakness, it wouldn't interfere with their life. This is because this ki is artificially cultivated by people. However, the true internal ki is different. Humans who lose their true internal ki can no longer sustain their life. In other words, it can be said that the true internal ki is vital for human life. Those who have reached the peak of martial arts can use the true internal ki as their own strength. However, the true internal ki exists to sustain life. A price must be paid to utilize its power. Excessive consumption of it would result in death. Even if cautiously consumed, the energy will be significantly damaged, and one wouldn't be able to lead a normal life for several months. I'm going to use a little. Right, just a little. Wouldn't it be meaningless if Chung Myung died before he saved Mount Hua? Right now, Chung Myung was probably the most crucial figure hidden within Mount Hua. Tap. Stimulate the true internal ki. Make sure not to bring out too much, just enough to use. The true internal ki, roused from its slumber, began to rage. It was then pushed into the danjeon. It's a little more than I thought. Chung Myung blew away his thoughts and grabbed the sword. Is it possible? It is. It has to be. A magnificent power was created by mixing the internal ki with internal energy and letting it flow throughout his entire body. As this energy began to flow through his unfamiliar body, his entire being shook. Kuh! A groan escaped from behind his lips. A terrible pain that made Chung Myung doubt his mind. Just once. I need to do it just once. A black-purple color began to form on his fingertips. He didn't learn martial arts in this life. It was nothing more than a clumsy imitation of what he remembered from the past, and it felt even more unfamiliar because of the childlike body. Chung Myung's hand cut through the air like a beam of light. A vivid trail of illusory purple light pierced the wall. Quack! It was a door that had to be opened in one go since Chung Myung couldn't handle doing it another time. But even his imitation was slow, thanks to his body's condition. Quack! Every time he moved, it hurt, but Chung Myung didn't stop and kept moving his hand. As the excessive movements continued, he could feel his muscles tearing as if they would snap at any moment, and his face was flushed and burning as though it would explode at any time. I'm the Plum Blossom Sword Saint. If he didn't have the ability, then he would have to move his body on pride alone. Biting his lip to drive his consciousness forward, Chung Myung unleashed his final struggle. Tuck! His hand stopped in the air. Done? His legs were trembling, and his heart pounded erratically, as if desperately trying to keep his body together. But he didn't have time to pay attention to his current condition. If the door still didn't open after this, he would truly be facing a disaster. It was then. He thought he heard a strange squeaking sound, the sound of something opening, and the huge door ahead moved. Ah, it opened! He thought that the door would open fully, but only the lock on it seemed to have been released. But it was... Suddenly, Chung Myung curled forward, grabbing his stomach. Blood poured out of his small mouth. It came out with a force that couldn't be swallowed back. Ugh! He wiped his lips with his sleeve. It seemed that his body was injured more than he thought. If this was the case, he would have to take at least 2 months' rest for his internal injuries to recover. Reviving Mount Hua is horrifyingly tough. Chung Myung spit out the blood remaining in his mouth and pitifully pushed the door open in a disgraceful way using the little might he had left. Gee! The door, sealed for ages, finally opened wide from side to side. Now, shall I check what Sahyong was hiding? With a cunning smile, Chung Myung confidently walked into the warehouse. Chapter 26. The place was narrower than expected. It was natural. It would have left a large hole in Mount Hua's finances if they had created a massive warehouse out of the 1,000-year-old cold iron. They would have never lasted this long. He kept whining every day that he had no money, yet he kept spending it to make things like this. Chung Myung felt a surge of anger, but what could he do? He could do nothing to a dead person. Chung Myung went inside and looked around. There were a lot of things stored here. What should he check first? Money! Chung Myung blinked his eyes and scanned the room. It had to be here. The slush funds which Sahyong was saving. Some shining piece of gold. Riches shining brilliantly. It must be here. Chung Myung continued to survey the room. Why? Why couldn't he see them? Chung Myung once again scoured the inside of the storeroom. No matter how many times he rubbed his eyes, however, he couldn't find anything shiny, let alone treasures. It shouldn't be this way. No. With how frugal his Sahyong was, he must have accumulated a lot more money than any other sect leader. It would be common sense for him to plan and keep aside a certain amount of wealth to prepare Mount Hua for any unexpected scenarios. But there's no money. A great sense of defeat came over him. Fucking bastard. He didn't keep any slush funds? Chung Myung rubbed his face. If there had been an emergency stash of money, he could have used them for any number of schemes. For the revival of Mount Hua, for buying drinks, and for buying more drinks. No, I'm purely focused on the revival of Mount Hua. Eh? Chung Myung abandoned his lingering desires and turned his head. There were things more important than wealth. This is it. Books lined up one after another on a bookshelf on one wall. Chung Myung gulped and walked over to it. This has to be it. He pulled out a book from the middle and scanned the contents. As he read each line, a bright smile slowly appeared. Right! There can be no other way. As expected, the books displayed on the first shelf were books of Mount Hua, which his Sahyong kept. These documents were generally supposed to be stored in the sect leader's house, but it seemed like copies were made and stored here in case of emergencies. And there weren't just ledgers from Chung Myung's time, but even from the previous generations too. With just this information, he would be able to slap those rotten jerks in the back of the head. Those rotten bastards are so dead. These ledgers were worth the painstaking effort he went through to open the door. And on the second shelf... Oh, no way! Chung Myung nearly screamed without realizing it. The authentic secret arts of Mount Hua are here. Huh? Chung Myung tilted his head. Are these the real deal? Chung Myung frowned. These things were a bit different from the martial arts he studied. In Mount Hua, the secret arts, which were almost as good as dead, were gathered here. Chung Myung scratched his cheek. Those foolish old bastards. It had been decided not to pass these down to the future disciples, but it was clear that they didn't abandon them. It seemed that his Sahyong was reluctant to completely throw them away. Maybe he thought it would negatively impact Mount Hua's future if they were abandoned, so he kept them here. If the first shelf full of ledgers showed the old sect leader's obligations and responsibilities to the sect, this second shelf represented his compassion and dedication.
Sayong. Chung Myung felt a rising surge of tears sting his eyes. Don't worry, I'll definitely revive Mount Hua to its original state. No, he would make it more prosperous than in the past. Chung Myung regained his ambition and turned. There was no rush and it will be fine. After all, the important thing was that Chung Myung knew how to use all the techniques. It was annoying to write it down for others, but he didn't plan on keeping the information a secret either. And finally, there was virtually nothing on the third shelf. There was only a single rolled scroll. What's this? Without hesitation, Chung Myung reached out, opened it, and immediately began to read it. From the sect leader, Sayong. If anyone is reading this, it means that the next generation's sect leader has been decided. Sometimes, a single line of writing conveys more than 100 words, so I leave my meaning in this humble form. The position of sect leader within Mount Hua isn't a position to lead. As anyone who becomes the next sect leader would naturally come to know, the one who leads Mount Hua are the precious disciples, and they are the ones who bring growth to Mount Hua. A sect leader's role is to protect and support them, to carry out their will without restrictions. Now that you are the sect leader, I hope you will put aside your own impatience and work for the sake of the sect. Mount Hua is simply Mount Hua. No one person can lead or wield it. Remember this when you are tired from life's difficulties and the heavy burden on your shoulders. Mount Hua will not fall. Mount Hua is Mount Hua. Whether it declines or flourishes, it will stay as Mount Hua. As sect leaders, we merely protect the spirit of the sect in our generation. Pray that the will of Mount Hua, which our ancestors protected, be passed on to future generations, and nurture our descendants to continue our will so that we will remain eternal. I leave you a heavy burden as the sect leader of the previous generation, the 21st sect leader of the great Mount Hua, Chung Myung. End. Chung Myung looked at the scroll silently. He knew that this wasn't a letter written by his Sayong to him, but weirdly, he was the person who needed to read this more than the others. Right. That man really nagged a lot. Chung Myung sighed and put away the scroll in his hands. The other things will be returned to Mount Hua, but not this scroll. Okay then. Chung Myung turned around with a smile. There wasn't much, but this should be enough. First, he had the ledgers, which were the most essential items. If he had them, the businesses could be retrieved. Then Mount Hua would be able to get out of the debt. So then, Chung Myung, who was about to walk outside, stopped walking. Wait a minute. It was strange. Why does it feel like something's off? He couldn't pinpoint what was so strange, but he felt something was wrong. Why was he feeling that way? Wait, third shelf. Chung Myung turned his head. The sect leader, his Sayong, Chung Myung, the 21st sect leader of Mount Hua, that man had been obsessed with neatly organizing things. It wasn't just the cleanliness. Even if the furniture in his room were off by a slight angle, he couldn't stand it. But 2 full shelves and 1 empty shelf. No, that man would have lost his mind. He knew it because he had been with that man for a long time. Chung Myung rushed to the empty shelf. Something has to be here. Surely. That empty shelf kept bothering him. Isn't it awkward to use an entire bookshelf for just 1 scroll? The Sayong that he knew wasn't that kind of person. If the one who came here wasn't Chung Myung, but someone else, they wouldn't have thought much of it. But now Chung Myung was there. He grabbed the shelf without hesitation and moved it to the side. There's nothing else around. But there was nothing behind the shelf except for the cold iron wall. But what about below? It could be. The floor seemed to be covered with iron, but... Chung Myung, who moved the shelf, put his hand on the floor and soon infused it with energy. If it was the old man that I knew, then it must be here. If there was any suspicious place, then something must be there. Nothing happened. He wondered if his internal energy wasn't strong enough. He couldn't feel anything. Maybe I'm wrong? It was at that moment when he was flustered and thought about giving up. There is something. Ah! As Chung Myung felt himself being sucked below where the floor once was, something gave way. Rumble. He heard a slight rumble. Eventually, with the sudden feeling of something falling,
Chung Myung lost his balance and collapsed backwards, rolling away from where he stood before.
Ouch!
After hitting his head several times, it felt like the night stars were flashing in front of him.
It wasn't too loud, was it?
He instinctively turned towards the entrance. However, it didn't seem like anyone noticed it. Although it was connected, it didn't seem like it could be heard because of the long corridor. More than that, Chung Myung jumped up and ran forward. Something opened for sure. Chung Myung ran to observe the hole which had formed.
Of course! Sahyung, you really are a nasty bastard.
A hidden double door was made in case someone other than the sect leader had come in. After all the hard work it took to find and open this place, nobody would have imagined that there was another secret hidden door here. Even Chung Myung wouldn't have known if he didn't understand his Sahyung so profoundly. Light shone from the entrance.
Light!
It seemed like the light was made to show the path to Chung Myung. Without hesitation, he threw himself into the opening. The entrance was small, even for a child's body. As he went down through the entrance, he found a space so small that straightening his back was difficult. In that place, Chung Myung stretched out his hand and decided to close the door, which opened. Slowly, slowly. He made sure that no sound came of it. And then, Chung Myung's eyes opened wide. His breathing became rapid and his heart began pounding. Blood rushed to his face as excitement colored his vision. He was dying of joy. There was happiness right in front of him. Gold bars were neatly stacked on one side, and various other treasures arranged at the other. And,
is this my tomb? Even unknown gems were in here.
Laughter kept coming out. Even when he tried not to laugh, he couldn't control it.
Right. Smile. Laugh. I'm finally rich.
The situation, which the 21st sect leader, Chung Myung, desperately sought to avoid by taking extreme measures to guard his wealth. This was the moment when the fate and fortune of Mount Hua firmly passed into the hands of the one person who should absolutely not have it. Chapter 27. Hyunjung softly sighed as he watched the sunlight peering through the window. For some, that sunlight may be the start of a pleasant day. But for those living on borrowed time, there was nothing more resentful than the sunlight which brings forth another day. It's morning again. Yet again, a new day has started. 2 days have already passed, and 5 more days were left to pay back the enormous debt. 5. Just 5 more days. Hyunjung quietly closed his eyes. 5 days. If he could not prepare 100,000 yang within this short period, then Mount Hua would fall into their hands. There are 3 things essential in life: food, clothing, and finally, shelter. Although they could live even if they lost their residence, those who stayed in Mount Hua would need to try and find a different way to lead their lives. Mount Hua could no longer be called Mount Hua. There may be some who wish to carry its name and succeed the will of Mount Hua. For many years, Mount Hua was considered a prestigious sect. Surely, some would wish to hold on to it. If a towering sect with thousands of disciples one day crumbles and can only shelter a few dozen students, and if it then loses its home and is exiled, can we not say that it has been thoroughly destroyed? Those who can't stay here will have no choice but to disperse. There will be people who will follow him for a time, but as their lives grow more difficult, wouldn't they simply find other work? And gradually... No. Hyunjung shook his head violently. This isn't the time to think so weakly. He still had 5 days left. He could protect Mount Hua if he found some way to raise the amount needed. He is the sect leader, and he will not give up until the day Mount Hua disappears. Everyone else has the luxury to give up, but he cannot falter. Hyunjung raised his hand and rubbed his face. Perhaps he could reach out to everyone who had so much as a needle-thin relationship with Mount Hua. Stories of Mount Hua's decline have circulated throughout the world. He only needed to find one capable person who would be willing to help them. Just one person. Hyunjung chuckled softly in derision. Help us. If someone wanted to help, they would have done it already. Even when Mount Hua had higher hopes than now, not one person helped them. And now,
Who would come and lend a vast sum of 100,000 yang to a ruined sect?
It's so burdensome.
It couldn't be avoided or ignored, but Hyunjung had to feel the weight each day as it grew on him. The ever-present fear that Mount Hua's life would be cut short with his generation. He prayed and prayed that the sun would fail to rise each morning as he struggled through another sleepless night. It was then. Sect leader. Hyunjung adjusted his expression. No matter how depressed he was, he couldn't show that to his disciples. Even if Mount Hua collapses tomorrow, he must be remembered as the noble sect leader who carried the woes of his students as he stood by their side.
What is it?
I think you need to come out and see. Hyunjung tilted his head. He moved right away and went outside. Right outside, Eungom stood there waiting with a blank face.
Eungom?
Hyunjung frowned. It wasn't Eunam, but Eungom. Wasn't Eungom in charge of the White Plum Blossom boarding house? If he came here, it meant that something had happened in the dorms. But what could happen in the dorms which required the sect leader's direct attention? Isn't it still so early in the morning?
What happened?
Sect leader. Eungom had a strange face. He seemed surprised, yet a bit exhausted too.
Just what could have happened?
He knew that gathering children and disciplining them was exhausting and required patience. Being chosen for this task, Eungom was generally a very calm and composed person. However, if even Eungom struggled to keep his composure, he wouldn't understand what happened.
I will tell you about the details on the way, sect leader. You need to see this for yourself. Guide me.
Hyunjung followed without question. He was curious. However, since Eungom asked in such a serious manner, he decided to simply follow him first.
Yes, sect leader.
Eungom moved quickly, and Hyunjung followed him without delay.
Where are we going?
Hyunjung frowned as he looked around. The place they were heading was in the dorms. It was a place behind the dorms, the Lotus Peak.
Why there?
However, Eungom kept climbing up with all his might without saying a word.
I'll know once I see it.
Halfway up the path with Eungom, he saw third-class disciples sitting scattered on the side.
Huh? Why were those kids here? And why were they all over the place?
Hyunjung's eyes widened. Even though their sect leader came, they couldn't even raise their heads to greet him and kept gasping for air sprawled out on the ground.
What is this?
Eungom, who came to a realization, yelled out, "You lot, the sect leader is here. Can't you show some manners?"
Leave them be.
But sect leader!
Rather, why are all the children in this condition?
Eungom looked around and then asked, Chung Myung, where is Chung Myung?
Chung Myung? Why was that name coming out here?
Hyunjung looked at Eungom with a face that said he couldn't understand at all. Chung Myung referred to the child who recently entered the sect, so why was he called?
I'm over here.
The answer came before his questions were answered. Hyunjung's eyes widened when he turned to see where the voice had come from.
You? Why? Huh?
A bizarre, almost grotesque young child walked out from behind a tree, face whiter than a blank sheet of paper with blushed lips like a corpse. The shadows under his eyes seemed to stretch down to his chin. He didn't seem like a human. It wouldn't seem strange if that child collapsed and died on the spot.
What happened?
I'm sorry. I trained a little too much.
What was that? If a person could take on such an appearance, such by training, no disciples would have survived until now. Training should make you stronger, not weaker. Make excuses that are believable.
At that moment, Eungom spoke. That doesn't matter right now. Hyunjung blinked his eyes for a moment.
Doesn't matter? What are you talking about? For the man in charge of looking after the children saying such ridiculous things. The White Plum Blossom boarding house is the future of Mount Hua. Weren't they the disciples who would lead Mount Hua into a new future? How could someone who was training the kids say that?
You need to see this. This one, Chung Myung, has found something strange.
Strange?
Hurry, sir. Eungom seemed serious.
What?
If it had been someone else showing such an attitude, Hyunjung would have yelled and cursed them right away. But he had a deep understanding of Eungom's character. If such a calm individual behaved in such a way, it must be serious. Hyunjung finally followed Chung Myung and Eungom and went into the forest.
What the hell is he?
Hyunjung couldn't continue. A small section of the earth came into his view. It had been dug out and held an old box within. The box was halfway open. Hyunjung's eyes nearly burst from their sockets.
He could see it. Inside the box was a shining gold light, and there was only one metal that could emit such golden light. But it wasn't simply the gold that caught his attention. It was the books next to the gold. The title of the books seemed to pull his soul from his body. Great Mount Hua's Hwaum Village Ledgers. A long title. This. Hyunjung couldn't come to his senses. Where did it come from? Why was gold here? He was too scared to approach this unbelievable reality. He was afraid that the items would disappear like a mirage if he reached out to grasp them. How did you find them? That child found them. Child? Hyunjung turned his head to the corpse-like figure. With a half-dying face, Chung Myung opened his mouth. I was training at dawn. What? Listening to the mosquito-like voice, Hyunjung tilted his head. Eungum decided to help him out. He seems to have come to Lotus Peak at dawn to train. Training at dawn? When did you start that? We started it a while back, from the day that child entered. From the day the child entered. How long has it been since he joined? No. I shouldn't be thinking about such a thing now. I can ask for details later. So you mean you found this while climbing the Lotus Peak for morning training? To be precise, I was too tired and decided to take a rest inside the bushes. But the place I sat on was strangely hard, and when I looked more intensely, something was sticking out, so I dug it out just in case. Oh my. But the stuff inside was so unusual, so I thought that I had to inform the elders rather than check it myself. Take your time. What kind of kid even trains so hard that they can barely speak? Training is the root. I get it. You should go back and rest. I will check it myself. Hyunjung swallowed back dry saliva as he approached the box. Trembling, he placed his hand on the box. However, what he touched wasn't the gold, but the books next to it. Great Mount Hua's Hwaum Village Ledgers. Hyunjung murmured to himself as if he had lost his mind as he took the books out one at a time. His trembling hands clearly spoke to the state of his turbulent mind. He didn't even open the books. He was terrified that if he opened the books clumsily, it would crumble to dust before his eyes. The Great Mount Hua Records. It was a book dealing with the history of Mount Hua. Although it may not play a functional role, it was still significant. Hyunjung carefully laid down the books and gazed at each of their titles. His eyes twitched. 7 Sages Sword. His whole body shook. This is Sect Leader. Hyunjung felt himself losing consciousness. Sect Leader, calm down. Hearing the people call for him, Hyunjung smiled as he closed his eyes. What came out of the box wasn't just some wealth and books. It was hope. Chapter 28. Sect Leader, open your eyes. Hyunjung opened his eyes in shock. A dream? He got up and saw that the box was still in front of him. Fortunately, it wasn't a dream. Eungum. Yes, Sect Leader. Call the merchants. Move the box to my residence and have the older disciples guard the perimeter. Yes, Sect Leader. No. I will move it myself. Right now. Hyunjung took a breath and calmed himself. Nothing was certain yet. To accurately understand the situation, he would have to check everything first and see if the items were genuine. But they must be genuine. If these things were buried here, along with such enormous wealth, they had to be genuine. No. Still, I need to be certain. Hope and anxiety battled against one another as his emotions surged. Has he felt like this any time in recent decades? Eungum. Yes, Sect Leader. Bring your things and come down the mountain. Yes. Hyunjung looked up and then suddenly looked at Chung Myung. Chung Myung. Yes, Sect Leader. You have worked hard. We will discuss this later. Yes. When Chung Myung stepped back without saying a word, Hyunjung hurriedly lifted the entire box. Then he made a request to Chung Myung. Take the other children and head back to the dorm. I will. Good. With that, Hyunjung headed down the peak, and Eungum followed him with the other valuables. The children who were there looked at them with blank eyes. What was that? Huh? Amid the confused children, Chung Myung smiled. This should be enough for now.
The wealth and supplies contained in the box were only a portion of what was in the warehouse. Why did he only give a portion? It's not Mount Hua's, it's Chung Myung's. No, that's certainly not why. It is because the first bite vanishes fast. If you give a buffet to a dying man, his body may not be able to withstand it and waste what's been given. Rather than overfeed him, you must give him enough to sate his hunger so that he would no longer starve. It's not necessarily a good thing to give someone more than they need. Chung Myung judged that the current Mount Hua couldn't handle the burden of a large sum of wealth. It was unreasonable for them to be handed an enormous sum of money at once. All the sect needed to do was start over. Of course, this was the trial for the sect, but it wasn't one for Chung Myung. Yunjong approached him. Saje. Huh? We were asked to go down. Shouldn't we head back to the dorm? Chung Myung nodded his head. We should. But why does Saje look like that? Something happened. Chung Myung waved his hand and dismissed the concern. Chung Myung knew what he was asking about. Thanks to using his pure internal ki, the condition of his body deteriorated. I should have been more careful. This wouldn't have happened in the past, but now he wasn't even in a stable body, so everything changed when he tried to overexert himself with a childlike body. It was foolish to think he could control it perfectly using this new and inexperienced body. It was only natural that he ended up using more of his true internal ki than he intended. You look like you're going to die. I won't die. Really? Would you prefer that I did? Yunjong turned his head away without answering. Huh? Not answering? Did you really want me to die? Such a bastard. You aren't going to die anyway, so why were you expecting me to say that I hope you won't die? Expect? Expect what? Chung Myung clicked his tongue at that. I really might be on the bed for a month or two. It wasn't easy to recover from such things. Even if Chung Myung tried living carefully, he could only struggle until his body returned to normal unless he could find some medicinal pills. By the way, how did you find that? It didn't seem like something normal, especially seeing how shocked the sect leader was. Live a good life and the heavens will look after you. So be a good boy from now on. If someone like Chung Myung was blessed by God, then the other children should already be guaranteed a blessed life. Yet, no one retorted. Chung Myung glanced down and looked at the sect leader descending the mountain. If he's been given this much, he should be able to handle it. Things will go well. If he isn't stupid. Come on, let's go down. Right, but where are you going? What? To go down, shouldn't we head down from this way? Yunjong pointed at the path leading down. Are you seriously asking something so obvious? Then what are you talking about? Chung Myung clicked his tongue at Yunjong's question. Sahyung. Huh? To be a warrior, you need to have a flexible way of thinking. Don't think that there is only one way down. Climbing to the top and descending the other side. There are many ways to go down. What sort of bullshit is he saying? That idiot. Come on. The sect leader and the others are gone, but we still have the training to do. The last 10 people won't get their meals today. Run! Yunjong's feet began to move as he hurriedly ran towards the peak. Even before he had a chance to express his dissatisfaction, the other kids followed him, running to the top in a panic. That devilish bastard! Fucking shit! I don't think I can catch up to him. Seeing the kids running with their might, Chung Myung smiled. I'll give a present to whoever finishes first. What should he prepare for the next time? The items he placed in that box and gave to the sect were just a little of what he had. The wealth brought out was less than 1/10 of the wealth in the storehouse. Chung Myung glanced up at the sky. It felt like his Sahyung was looking down at him with a distorted face. Eh? Don't tell me you think I'm going to eat it up all alone. Healthy. Just enough in moderation. Right, moderation. Chung Myung smiled as he moved. It's genuine. He could feel his heart pounding. Of course, this answer was expected, but the impact didn't diminish even though it was expected. Hyunjong asked, unable to hide his trembling. Are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. The ledgers are genuine, and we also secured the deed lying underneath the gold. Sect leader. He wanted to speak, but words weren't coming out. He couldn't help but laugh in a hoarse voice. How did this? We have it! Sect leader! No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't stop smiling. It was said that no one knew what would happen in life, but do such precious things really happen? What if this was discovered a week late? He didn't even want to think about it. The heavens have not forsaken us. No, it's not the heavens, but the ancestors of Mount Hua who kept looking after and helping them. Hyunjung closed his eyes, unable to hide his burning passion. Then can we prove the contents in the ledger? These certificates were issued by the nation. Of course we can prove it. We can bring the businesses of Hwalm under us once more, and even Taehwa Pavilion as well. Good. That's good. It was a miracle. In just a few days, the disciples of Mount Hua would have been thrown out to live on the streets. But with these books, they could not only protect their home, but they could even recover the businesses they lost so long ago. A jackpot. The head of financial affairs, Hyunjung, laughed. It is improbable, but even if they are fake, we can overcome the immediate crisis. Even if these ledgers don't work, the wealth in the box is worth well over 100,000 yang. It is more than enough to pay it back. Thank God. It's a relief. With this money, we can solve all the financial problems of Mount Hua at once. And if we can take back the businesses, we won't ever have to worry about money again. He could hear such honeyed words flowing non-stop. To Hyunjung, it sounded like the most beautiful symphony. That's not all. Hyunsang, the head of martial arts, smiled and said, This 7 Sages sword is the real thing. I will have to examine it more later, but there wasn't a single error written in this book. Oh. It is also encouraging that the Falling Flower sword is correct. Although it isn't on the same level as the other ones, it is perfect for learning along with the 7 Sages sword. It will serve as an intermediate step into the more advanced arts. I see. The bamboo leaf sword seems to be legitimate too. He was losing it. Hyunjung couldn't keep up. If he spoke now, it would only make him look stupid. It's an indescribable feeling. The 7 Sages sword has fallen into our hands once again. In the past, it was practiced as the basis for all of Mount Hua's martial arts. Finally, it will be like it was in the past. It wasn't like that for us, right? Yes, sect leader. This is the treasure of Mount Hua. The sect leader noticed that Hyunsang had opened his mouth to say something and then closed it, but Hyunjung didn't miss it. Is there some problem? No, it was nothing. Is it about the martial arts? Not at all. They are genuine. I can guarantee that. I'm glad. As the sect leader nodded, Hyunsang spoke. Wasn't it said that a third-class disciple found them? Right. A child called Chung Myung joined recently. He needs to be rewarded. We should give him something. Thanks to that child, Mount Hua. I didn't mean that, sect leader. Hyunyoung cut short Hyunjung's words. He is a child who entered Mount Hua. How long has it been since we saw someone have such a heart for Mount Hua? Right. Even if that child didn't know the value of the books, he would clearly recognize the value of the gold and jewels. If it were me, the moment the box was opened, I would have taken a few items and hid them somewhere else. If not, I would bury the box itself and hide it from others. They were horrible words, but what Hyunyoung said was the truth. Right. I didn't think of that. A unique child. Truly strange and unique. That's a wealth that could shake the heart of any man in Mount Hua. If I had seen it, I wouldn't have spoken about it right away. I'll remember that. Sect leader. Hyunyoung was a bit flustered, to which Hyunjung said, It is wonderful, but Mount Hua got a blessing. Hyunjung smiled. Although it was a coincidence, he was really thankful that this box was discovered at the right moment. He thought that changing his mind and bringing in the beggar was the right decision, as it was going to save Mount Hua. Hyunyoung. Yes, sect leader. Are the ledgers real? I will put my neck on the line. I see. Then there are people we need to call right away. Hyunjung's eyes were serious. Now was the time to punish those who tried to aim their arrows at Mount Hua. All those involved, bring them to Mount Hua. Hyunjung, the sect leader, was finally able to stand tall. Chapter 29.
Oh my, this is tough.
Yu Jong-san, clearly suffering, groaned aloud. The mountain leading up to Mount Hua was so steep that even people living in the village below couldn't climb it with ease. Fortunately, they had escorts to help them climb the mountain, but ordinary people wouldn't dare it. The fact that they were climbing the mountain again less than a week after their last trek was making him uncomfortable both physically and mentally.
Ugh,
Owner Yu, be strong.
I'm trying to be strong.
Yu Jong-san was annoyed. Despite the escorts encouraging him, he struggled greatly to climb each step. He was being asked to climb a sheer cliff which no ordinary person could pass through by relying on a worn-out old rope. This was why Mount Hua didn't develop.
Once I get my money back, I will never come to this place again.
Because he didn't want to see Mount Hua ever again. As they climbed the cliff, a smooth and flat area greeted them. Owner Kong, who confirmed that everyone had come up, opened his mouth.
We will take a break here. Oh my, Owner Kong. That's a great idea. My legs are shaking.
Owner Yu needs to work out more often.
I'm no stranger to exercise, but I don't think my body will ever get used to climbing this mountain.
It isn't that bad. Owner Yu shook his head and sat down on a rock. But Owner Kong... Owner Pang approached Owner Kong. What is it? Why is the sect leader suddenly asking us to come to Mount Hua? Those who were rubbing their aching legs all turned their focus towards the man. Maybe he came up with some money? Owner Kong smiled softly. Is that possible? 100,000 isn't a small amount. Owner Kong spoke bluntly. But if it is borrowed, there is no one in the world who would willingly lend 100,000 to a dying sect. A person with such a kind heart could never become rich.
Surely.
Yu Jong-san shrugged his shoulders.
Then what does Owner Kong think? Why do you think the sect leader has called us?
To give up.
Give up?
Owner Kong looked at the summit where Mount Hua stood. Likely, he must have tried to reach out for assistance and been denied at every turn. It would be distasteful to drag out the suffering until the last moment, so he called us ahead of time to concede.
Huh?
Yu Jong-san clicked his tongue at it.
This is the first time I've ever heard of someone calling their debt collectors to their door without anything to pay, just to get rid of them more quickly. What a stiff debtor.
Well, he is in a difficult situation because of the debt. Still, he is the sect leader of Mount Hua. Don't speak too rashly about him.
Owner Kong is such a kind-hearted person. How can you think so well about someone who borrowed money and hasn't paid it back for decades?
Owner Kong smiled. What I mean was for us to keep our manners. The name of Mount Hua will soon disappear. Why make it more painful for them than it needs to be?
The whole world should know of Owner Kong's benevolence. We have such different attitudes.
It was nothing. Seeing that, Yu Jong-san clicked his tongue and thought to himself,
spouting pleasantries while sitting around doing nothing.
They were planning to confiscate the sect and kick them out of their homes. Who would care about your courtesy?
But,
Yu Jong-san looked at the summit.
Will we really get the money?
He was always worried whether the sect would be sold for a reasonable price. Indeed, Owner Kong spoke quite confidently, but any merchant would be worried when money was on the line. But Yu Jong-san wasn't worried about that.
If a member of the Jungnam sect came here, doesn't that mean they are interested in this?
In the past, the entire world knew what kind of relationship existed between Mount Hua and the Jungnam sect. It was now a faded story since Mount Hua's name vanished and the Jungnam sect ascended too high up for the others to reach. However, the Jungnam sect leaders would certainly remember their rivalry with Mount Hua, right? If they continued to hold on to their resentment, then it was evident that they wouldn't want even a fragment of Mount Hua to remain in the world.
Owner Kong must be thinking of selling it to the Jungnam sect.
Out of the total debt of 100,000 yang, Yu Jong-san was due to receive 5,000 yang. How much was 5,000 yang? Even if the money was squandered and spent frivolously, it was an enormous sum that would still be enough to leave for the next generation to live comfortably. The long tug-of-war is finally coming to an end. Yu Jong-san's heart began to flutter at the thought of finally getting his hand on such wealth.
I wonder what the sect leader's face would look like.
The thought of seeing that old man's solemn face being distorted made Yu Jong-san feel a bit bitter, but he quickly suppressed the rising feeling of sympathy. After all, Isn't it true that there are no friends or family when it comes to the matter of money?
Let's start climbing now.
Yes. All of them got up with a push. Despite having a hard time, they didn't say anything. With their eyes blinded by money, they started to climb again. Each time I see it, it feels strange. Someone in the crowd voiced their thoughts.
It's just a building barely holding itself together.
A sense of reluctance could be heard in the voice. Falling buildings and walls, and the front gate where the door had been broken through already. An obviously ruined sect appeared before them, either destroyed by someone else or neglected for years due to bankruptcy. Still, something was captivating about it. The weight of Mount Hua protected Shaanxi for years. Despite not saying a word, they all shared similar feelings. Now, they were here to suffocate Mount Hua's final breath. Today, the sect leader was going to finally give in. Mount Hua, which protected this land for hundreds of years, was finally coming to an end. Did everyone feel the weight of their actions? Everyone coughed in silence. They had no intention of turning away from such money, but still, they were people born in Huam village, so they couldn't help but feel bad that they were killing their guardians with their own hands. Let's go in. Only Owner Kong seemed fine. When he took the lead, everyone hesitated and then followed him.
Is everyone here?
As they entered, Unam greeted them.
Elder Unam, nice to see you.
I am still not good enough to be called an elder. Please just call me Unam.
As you wish.
Unam smiled and spoke. The sect leader is waiting. This way. Owner Kong frowned.
Are they able to pay it back?
When they arrived the other day, the others stopped them. But now they were asking them to come in with casual expressions. Even if the sect leader had informed them that these merchants would come, wasn't it strange how much their attitude has changed? Owner Kong looked cautiously at Unam's back and followed behind him.
We'll know soon enough. Maybe this is the true nature of Mount Hua.
Perhaps they acknowledged their fate and decided to meet the end in peace. Rather than look like cowards begging for more time, they've chosen to die standing with their heads held high.
I feel worried.
Perhaps it was because the moment he had waited for so long was finally coming true. Ordinary people tend to let their guard down as soon as their goal is within sight. But Kong Mun-yeon is a shrewd man who becomes more nervous at these times. As they quietly walked, they reached the residence of the sect leader. Standing in front of it was Hyunjung waiting for them.
We greet the sect leader.
When Owner Kong issued his greetings, the others followed. It was the last step. He wanted to be as polite as possible.
Welcome. You must have gone through a lot while coming up here.
Hyunjung smiled softly and greeted everyone.
I am sorry to take your time. I hope you understand that I had to ask you to come up here instead of me coming down to meet you all.
It's no issue at all. We are busy, but not busier than the sect leader, so it is obvious that we should come. Owner Kong responded with a smile.
Rather than that, what? Such a hurry. You must have had a hard time climbing the mountain. So maybe a cup of tea.
Sect leader. Owner Kong cut the sect leader's words off with a resolute tone. It is good to have a cup of tea and talk, but we are merchants, so we would like to discuss the business affairs first. We merchants are people who deal with problems first and then eat or drink later. I hope the sect leader understands that.
Of course. I see I was only thinking of myself.
Hyunjung smiled and then said,
Then, let's get to the point without wasting time.
Thank you. Owner Kong smiled.
I have brought you all here today to convey the position of Mount Hua.
Position of Mount Hua? Hyunjung looked at Owner Kong. Owner Kong was already playing out the situation in his head.
I have tried every method available, but I haven't been able to find anyone willing to lend money to Mount Hua. In other words, it doesn't seem like I can repay the debt within the given date.
Owner Kong frowned at those words. Sect leader, we have given you enough time. We also need to earn enough to make a living. We can't extend your deadline any further.
Which is why I am saying this.
Hyunjong made eye contact with each person. I know that it cannot be delayed any longer, but it is possible for Mount Hua to make the full payment before the due date. Please understand. Hyunjong bowed. I can't pay back all of that money, but I can pay a portion of it. So if anyone here would be fine with personally delaying the repayment date, it would help us greatly. As the sect leader lowered his head towards them, everyone was shocked and embarrassed. A strange atmosphere began to flow amidst the crowd. Chapter 30. Chung Myung, resting on the eaves of a building from a distance, seemed to be enjoying himself as he spied on the sect leader and merchants. So that's how he plans on attacking. Chung Myung's eyes, which looked at the sect leader, gleamed. He didn't know. Was the sect leader seeking to push them into the hellfire, or was he giving them one last chance at redemption? It could be interpreted either way. However, one thing was certain. Hyunjong, the sect leader of Mount Hua, wasn't as simple of a man as he seemed. This is how it should be. Didn't he see it? The figure of the sect leader, hunched over and trembling in sadness within the dark corridor, clinging to the door he couldn't open. He was the one who maintained Mount Hua. Even as the burden grew and the pain tore away at him from the inside out, he carried the collapsed sect on his fragile back without sacrificing his gentleness or dignity. Chung Myung narrowed his eyes. But that shouldn't be all. He proved his patience. However, that wasn't the only trait a sect leader should possess. Of course, that is important too, but Mount Hua, no. There are certain qualities essential to being a successful sect leader in any force. To remain cool-headed and composed. That is how a sect leader needs to be. Although a sect is where martial artists are born, the essence of discipline is remaining calm and keeping a cool head. Regardless of their original personality, a sect leader must have this trait. For the sake of Mount Hua, you must be able to trust your decisions with all your mind and body, making decisions while rationally thinking out your course of action. So the Hyunjong have the heart of a sect leader. Chung Myung, lying down, rested his chin on his hands and slightly raised his body. Crack. The sound of bones breaking in his back. Up! He immediately grabbed his waist and fell back down to his original position. I'm going to die. There wasn't a single part in his body that felt fine, probably because his body wasn't trained properly. Even though he was constantly practicing, his body wasn't recovering quickly enough. He had calculated that it would be possible to restore his body in a month or two, but the problem was that he would have to endure the pain for those months. He resurrected into the body of a young, weak child and was constantly exhausted to the point of dying. And now he couldn't even lift his body. I need to do something about this. Chung Myung took a deep breath and shook his head. His body's condition could be dealt with later. First, he had to see how the situation resolved itself. Did you ask us to delay your repayment? Owner Kong frowned subtly. This was something he didn't expect. He never underestimated the power of Mount Hua. Dozens of sects emerge and disappear every day, so he knew that a sect running for 100 years wouldn't be an easy target. Although the situation wasn't good for Mount Hua, it was still a sect with a long history. But is this all that is left of them? He wanted to laugh. Did I overestimate Mount Hua? If they had potential, they wouldn't have arrived at such a desperate situation at all. Sect leader, I clearly told you before that there is no way we can delay the payment any longer. Don't get me wrong. I am not asking Owner Kong right now. Huh? Hyunjong looked at Owner Kong and spoke. I am well aware of Hwam's position. This is why I am asking all of you directly now. Even if it's 100,000 yang, doesn't each of you have a different amount to receive? That is true. So, I am personally asking if there is anyone fine with being paid at a later time. Owner Kong frowned. He didn't understand what the man meant. So what you're saying is that you can pay back those who can't afford to delay any longer? That's right. Sorry?
Owner Kong's eyes widened.
Even if Mount Hua isn't what it used to be, there are still those who are willing to help us. We didn't get the whole 100,000 yang, but we might be able to pay back a few of you. With your help, Mount Hua won't lose its name. So please, to those who will show mercy to Mount Hua's current situation, in the name of Mount Hua, I will surely repay you.
The sect leader swore again, but he had a confident expression now. Seeing that, Owner Kong had a bitter face.
What nonsense! So,
at that moment, Yu Jong-san, who was watching from the side, cut off Owner Kong's words. It wasn't intentional, but Owner Kong stopped talking and frowned.
So, if we delay the payment date, we will still get the money? Yes. Sect leader, let's be honest now.
Yu Jong-san continued.
We all know that Mount Hua may very well collapse tomorrow. The sect's condition isn't a secret, nor is it unknown to any of us. Even the sect leader should understand. If we trust what you said and postpone the repayment date, doesn't that mean there is also a risk of your sect collapsing and us receiving nothing? That is right. Does that make any sense?
Owner Kong calmed himself. It was true that Yu Jong-san cut his words off, but he was doing a fine job of cornering the old man. Normally, Owner Kong would have soothed the situation, but he didn't do it this time. He wanted to push the sect leader a little farther.
It is finally done. Mount Hua's long history is coming to an end.
It may seem bitter that the once great Mount Hua Sect has ultimately been crushed by the power of money, but it was more meaningful for Owner Kong, who had much to gain through this.
Owner Yu. Yes, sect leader. What should I offer you? Huh?
Hyunjong shrugged. A calm wind blew in from somewhere and he smiled.
There is nothing left of Mount Hua. Now, all that remains of Mount Hua is the honor of supporting Hualm down below for many years. All that I have to offer is Mount Hua's name. That, if you ask about the risk and what to trust, then this is my answer. The name of Mount Hua. The history of Mount Hua. Wouldn't that be enough?
Yu Jong-san went silent. The name of Mount Hua. History of Mount Hua. Right. Such meaningful words. But the people gathered here were merchants. Merchants had no reason to care about name or history, only money. Would it make money or lose money? But to ask merchants to give him time by offering their name and history as collateral.
Ha!
Yu Jong-san couldn't stop his laugh.
Sect leader, aren't you being too stubborn? Was it too much to ask?
Hyunjong just asked quietly. At the heavy emotions held within his eyes, Yu Jong-san stopped laughing.
I guess it could be too much.
But unlike his serious and heavy eyes, the voice which came out of his mouth was soft.
But I would like to ask for at least this much. I believe in the name of Mount Hua, which has been protecting Shaanxi and the Hualm village for hundreds of years, and I know it hasn't been in vain. Let me ask the other way around. What does Mount Hua mean to you? Do you feel that there is no real value in the name or history of Mount Hua?
No one could answer it. Mount Hua. Who would dare call the name lightly? Who would dare say its history was meaningless? Now, only a few traces of the past remained, but no one would take the name so lightly. Moreover, it will be even more so for those who live their lives at the foot of Mount Hua. So no one was willing to continue the conversation except for one person.
I feel that our discussion has drifted a bit off topic.
Owner Kong spoke. He looked at Hyunjong. Unlike Hyunjong's eyes, his eyes were sharp.
In summary, those who wish to personally delay the payment date will be repaid later, and those who don't will receive payment now? Yes. Good.
Owner Kong nodded.
Ordinarily, this is something that should be opposed in the name of the Hualm Merchants Association. But I am a man with a sense of propriety, so I will allow it. Anyone who wishes to do so may personally delay the repayment. But, he looked back and spoke, you must take responsibility for your own actions. The Merchants Association will not provide any help or protection to those who delay the reimbursement date, even if they lose their money. A subtle pressure. You may choose,
Those who will be paid now stand here, and those who are fine with delayed payment go over there. Owner Kong pointed to the other side. Is that all, sect leader? Yes. Although I disagree, I shall respect the sect leader's thought until the end. Although Mount Hua doesn't have much time left, it is still worthy of at least this much respect. Hyunjong nodded his head. Thank you for this. Owner Kong frowned without realizing it. Despite his provocation, Hyunjong didn't change. I'll break that composure of yours. Owner Kong, who thought that, said, How is it? Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be anyone who can delay their repayment. See? Owner Kong pointed behind himself. Hyunjong looked to see the merchants. All those who met Hyunjong's eyes turned their heads and looked down to avoid his gaze. Do you need more time? Hyunjong didn't answer and closed his eyes. No matter how long you wait, nothing will change. No one will give up so much money because of the name of Mount Hua, which faded long ago. So let's stop this, sect leader. Step down now. You have done enough. Owner Kong was intoxicated with the sense of victory. Now with this. It was at this moment he could hear footsteps behind him. Unknowingly, he turned back and looked. Owner Yu. Yu Jong-san was walking to the other side with a sour expression. He placed himself alone in the area designated for those fine with receiving delayed payments. What the hell? Seeing the absurd expression on Owner Kong, Yu Jong-san sighed. Look here, Owner Yu. What are you thinking? Kong Mun-yeon's furious bellow spread sharply in all directions.